We started talking about education last week, and it was in context of AI and how it's changing the world of jobs. It was a discussion about how education system would need to change. And I don't think we did the topic justice. I think we need to revisit it.
In preparation for the AI doom.
Not only that, I think a broader reflection on what we learn formally, how we are formally educated, and perhaps share our experience of what it felt like to go through schooling, etc. And given the choice, if we had a blank slate or the ability to influence some change in the system, because it's a good time to change it. The world's changing, the skills that will be required in the future is completely different. So what, if any, changes we would make to the way the formal education occurs from when we are maybe 5 years old to up till 16, 17, 18 when we leave school.
16.
What do you think?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, all right,
Yeah,
cool.
okay.
You want to get your energy up a little bit? Just star jumps?
We've just been renovating.
So I'm curious to understand what your experience of schooling as a whole was. And I think, I know you kind of went through different phases. You did part of your schooling in Wales, in Cardiff, and then you migrated to Australia as a 14-year-old and then finished high school in Australia. So I think there's some variations there. But yeah, interested to hear your take, my take, and then we probably move into a discussion around what we'd change.
Okay. So I hated school. I'll start with that one.
Do you want to moderate that opinion overall, or?
Yeah, my parents constantly said, enjoy them, they'll be the best years of your life. You don't know at the moment, but you will after you've left, looking back. And I can honestly say that I started to enjoy my life fully when I left school. I can control my life more directly. So I didn't really enjoy a day of school at all.
A day, not even a day?
No, art classes, maybe sports, the sports side of things, but the rest of it, I didn't like it. I hated it.
So was it about the education curriculum? Was it about the school culture that you went to, the kids you went to school with? What was it? Anything in particular?
I really don't know, to be honest. I just didn't really enjoy it outside of the sports and the art classes. I wasn't enjoying the subjects, I guess. It comes back to the fact that I was born an artist. What kind of enjoyment am I going to get from rote learning the multiplications or Pythagoras theorem or all of Henry VIII's wives when all you want to do is draw and paint and be creative? I just felt I was being held back, a direction I was predestined to go.
Yeah, rote learning was a big feature of our education as well.
Yeah.
So rote learning, but what about, can you think of good moments at school, good teachers maybe, good friends you made? Anything?
Yeah, well, they were friends. You don't really appreciate them at the time. I guess looking back, they were friends. But I wouldn't do it again.
That's a bit depressing way to start.
Yeah, things got better when I left. Yeah.
My experience was completely different. I grew up in Fiji. The setting that I grew up in was very traditional, and it was so traditional, in fact, that the generation before me, all of my dad's sisters, none of them were sent to school. They didn't have the opportunity. The boys went, but the girls didn't. So education in our family, in our society where I was very special. It was almost like a special treat. You get to go to school, you get to educate yourself, you get to learn. And I had an older brother and an older sister who were going to school while I was home watching them go away and left alone with the nanny. So by the time it came time for me to go to school, I just couldn't wait, and I was so happy to go.
The first day?
Oh, the first day I was so happy.
Oh,
I
my
just
God.
was. Mum tells this story of my older brothers and sister probably just having a moment where they were crying and didn't want to go to school. I just couldn't wait to get out of the house and go and do my own thing at school. And I really enjoyed my school life, even though, you know, it was a very strict school environment. So again, in Fiji, so this is 1989, I went to year 1. The school system was still very, and kindergarten wasn't a formal year, so I started schooling at 6, right? So already you're quite old. And before that, I just had a little bit of exposure to kindergarten, but nothing beyond that. No formal education, no preschool, no kindy. So I started at 6 and I was well and truly ready. I absorbed everything like a sponge, and overall, school was very easy for me. It was very effortless for me to just learn everything that I was supposed to learn and get good grades. And I, you know, topped the class, topped the school, even all through high school. The academic side was very simple, and in fact, it was too simple. For me, it felt like there were bits where I felt held back, but for different reasons than you. The curriculum, Fiji at that time didn't have a very curriculum to account for the differences in learning abilities between students. So there was no opportunity for me to skip grades or move faster through different curriculum, and there wasn't even different grades of maths. We all had to learn the same math, which was, you know, really difficult for some kids, especially once we went into high school and math wasn't their strong point. And once you start doing calculus, it's not for everyone, right? So we had a very average curriculum, which meant that most people can progress to the next year. And then there was a bit that was difficult. Maybe 5% of it was challenging to really bright students that many other kids wouldn't get to. So, I mean, it did not take into account the different learning abilities. It was a very average kind of curriculum, and that's where perhaps it didn't give me as much as I wanted from school. Especially in the early primary school years, the level at which we were taught literacy and numeracy was so basic, and I used to get bored out of my head in class itself. But what I liked about school, the reason I liked, is because it wasn't home. You know, at home we had to do chores. I'm very glad my parents got us to do all the chores, because now I have really good life skills.
I'm kind of smiling because I know what your father's like and how disciplined he is.
Exactly. So we were weeding gardens, we were cleaning the chicken coop. Mum is a clean freak, so we were washing the windows, we were sweeping the house 3 times a day. And, you know, she's interested in cooking and creating, and we had recipes and books, so we were always in the kitchen cooking, creating new things. And in a way it was nice, but we always had that. And I mean, that was an education in itself. Now I'm very competent, you know, I can grow my own food. If I have to, I can raise chickens and ducks and get one ready, prep the full meal, cook outside on an open fire. I have all those life skills thanks to that. But, you know, when you're a kid, you want to see the world outside it. When you want to hang out with different people, you want to have friends, you want to get a sense of other people's lives. And school was that portal into the other world. Because again, you have to remember, there was no internet. We didn't have television in Fiji until I was in year 3. And even then, for all of my life there, it was only one channel. And it started at maybe 4 o'clock or something like that. The radio stations was the main entertainment, but at home, Mum and Dad determined what radio stations we listened to. So it was the old people radio we used to listen to all the time. And yeah, I mean, kids these days have so much authority at home to determine what goes on, and parents kind of revolve their lives around that. It wasn't like that with us. Mum and Dad were the head of the family. We, you know, were grateful that they fed us and kept us. And I'm not complaining. I think it was nice to have the demarcation to say, you know, they're the parents and you're the child. And that relationship obviously balanced out.
It became a bit of a blurry line, wasn't it? Didn't it, between you and your parents being the sort of dominant
well, my brother and I were older, right?
You were quite dominant.
Yeah, it's a third child, so it's a typical third child kind of story where you're more rebellious, you challenge more, you want to create more of a space. It's a normal dynamic that plays out. The first kid is the nicest, the second one sort of plays at the edges, the third one, you know, completely upends
Lets it
any
rev.
parent's view of their control. But anyway, given the traditional environment that I grew up with, I always felt that school was special. I should say my mom went to school. My mom was literate. My mom was working, has always worked ever since, I've known her. So she kind of lived a more modern life, more modern, progressive life. And that's the life I wanted. And my dad, thankfully, was very modern and progressive as well. He didn't discriminate between his daughters and sons. And both of them really didn't. And we had equal opportunity, and we were brought up with very equal kind of roles. It was not a gendered kind of household where girls had to do this and boys had to do that.
He still put you below the dogs, though, didn't he?
No, he didn't. Him and my dad have a thing. Anyway, so that was my experience. I loved education. I loved, in the context of where I was growing, it was such a privilege to go to school, to learn. And yeah, there were limitations in the way things were taught, and with hindsight, and the teachers were really strict, and that had a pros and cons. And I had difficulties with a few teachers through high school. And by the time I reached year 12, and Fiji has 13 years of school, I was ready to leave school, which is what I did. I did one final HSC equivalent exam, and then instead of staying for another year to finish high school in Fiji, I moved to Australia and did a college, which was a bridging to a university, because I was well and truly done with school by that stage. I just could not stay in that environment. And again, it was a very particular issue with a particular teacher and the discipline and the constant kind of pressure that she put on me at school.
The one teacher?
The one teacher, yeah. But because she was the main teacher, it just became unbearable for me.
So you took her out, didn't you?
I did not. I don't know what the issue was. I couldn't put a step out of line, and I've always been very outspoken, and I've always been very outspoken, and I've always rebelled against the traditional kind of notion that somebody should get respect by default of their position. And I give them, by default, I'll give a person respect who's older than me, because that's how we were brought up.
Yeah.
But if I see their behavior is not congruent to what they should be like, then I don't feel the need to be respectful towards them. And I've had this kind of streak all through my childhood, which was not the best streak to have in a very strict disciplinarian environment. So it didn't always work out for me.
It's pretty common to not sort of kowtow to illegitimate authority.
Absolutely.
It's very Chomskyan.
Yeah, that's me,
Isn't it?
Chomskyan.
It's
Makes me sound kind of more dignified, my rebellious nature. So that was my experience with school. But there were also teachers that I met that were really good teachers. And if I think back now, I mean, when I went to primary school, I have to say there were some really even worse teachers who took on corporal punishment quite literally, and we were whooped when we were in primary school. Everyone was whooped. My parents were whooped. They've got stories of the sort of cruel punishments they had to go through, and we had our fair share. By the time we went to high school, things had sort of relaxed a bit. There was no hitting of kids, but there was a very clear, and again, I don't think it's necessarily wrong, there was a clear division of role that your teachers are higher in authority than you are as students, and you have to listen and obey in a way that inculcates a sense of discipline. And because the teachers were so strict, we didn't have any issues with bullying at school. Because if you were outed as a bully, I mean, you'd get it.
Right.
There was no way out. So there was no bullying, absolutely no bullying when we grew up. Maybe a little bit of teasing, as kids do, but nothing vicious. Like the stories you hear these days, nothing like that.
Okay, that's
What about in
unusual.
Wales? Did you have that?
There was quite a lot of bullying. It was quite a rough school. Every year, I remember the fourth formers, so the younger form would beat up all the boys in the fifth form.
What?
All of them.
Physically beat
them up. Yeah, so you just see these gangs just beating up these poor
Didn't the teachers
kids.
do anything?
I think they weren't there a lot of the time, and I think a lot of the time they were afraid of these kids.
Oh my God. See, this is
Yeah.
where I think that kind of imbalance in power between teachers and having teachers have authority is actually not such a bad thing.
Oh no, you definitely need a lot of discipline
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
teenagers and kids.
It's only
For
later
sure.
in life, as we went through high school when we were 16, 17, 18, where it was a different relationship with our parents and a different relationship with our teachers as well, where you are young adults and they begin to treat you like young adults. But before then, there's a lot of structure and discipline that kind of more strict regime provides, which I thought was useful.
Yeah, with authority at all. It's probably the least of my worries at school.
Yeah, so overall, I'm grateful for the education and enjoyed the school. And I still keep in touch with at least one friend, my bestie from high school, and she's one of the reasons I used to enjoy going to school. We had such a good time together.
I'm sure the audience don't really want to know about how you got along with your friends and all
No,
that.
so let's start with your stage.
Yeah,
So what
back
would
to
you
me.
what would you change if you had to change something about school?
For me, I think I would have liked to have been. I think I'd like the teachers to acknowledge that one student is different from another and has different needs early on. So early on, they could see that I was drawing and painting and engaged and happy doing that, and then probably focused the teaching more on my creative needs. So I know it sounds a bit privileged and asking a bit much just to change the whole curricula for one person, but I've just seen sort of generally that the teaching system could actually just pinpoint the specific needs early on and then have a broader direction rather than a narrow one. I'm not sure what it's like now. I'm sure it's a whole lot better, but I battled with the maths and the sciences till I had a choice.
Yeah.
At maybe when the last year of school, perhaps I could just get rid of physics. But it's a long time to be dealing with something you really loathe, and it's totally against my grain. Whereas some more
Poor
humanitarian subjects, the humanities, or develop some more subjects for creative people.
Yeah, I think it's a struggle even now, even in education systems that are advanced and better funded. Say in Australia, in the public education environment, it's really difficult to have the resources for more personalized learning. It's interesting when people talk about artificial intelligence and technology, they see that opportunity for AI to complement a teacher in a classroom and provide a kid a more personalized learning experience for whatever given subject. What you are describing, though, goes beyond that. You are describing sort of something that I don't think is within the control of teachers, which is the subjects that you do. Because the way the standard curriculum works is there's a certain set of subjects that you have to do at a certain level for a long time. I don't disagree with that necessarily, because I think there's some core skills all kids need. Whether they like math or not, they have to learn to be numerical. Everyone should have not only good numeracy skills, I think, and given my 10 years in banking and seeing the really bad side of people not being numerate, not making good decisions, not having any sort of control over their financial life.
That's not got nothing to do with learning calculus.
Yeah, I agree
Financial
with that.
responsibility and
I'm talking about
rote
math
learning.
at a young age, numeracy, core
Yeah,
core
but that's going
financial
to do with
skills.
the illiterate financial acumen in the workplace.
It has to do with being confident with numbers. There's a lot of people who leave school, even in the bank I used to find, there's a lot of adults who are not confident in their numeracy skills. And I don't understand why people have this fear of numbers. Part of the reason I wanted the first Willow the Wanderer book to be about counting, and to do it in a fun and engaging way so that kids are looking for hidden creatures and learning to count in a fun way, is because I've seen adults having a fear of numbers. my theory is that it's because of the way maths is taught at school. It's not natural. Reading isn't a natural thing for a lot of kids. Numeracy and maths is not a natural thing for a lot of kids, right? And so by forcing them to rote learn and making them feel dumb when they don't learn to read at a certain level, or when they don't learn math at a certain level, it just plants a lifelong fear of numbers and words. That's not helpful, because everybody needs core literacy and numeracy skills to navigate life. So I think there's a certain amount of learning that's absolutely necessary around those things, even if you are artistically inclined.
Well, I didn't mind, early on, I didn't mind learning the times table, learning basic addition, and all that sort of stuff. The basics, I can do the basics. It's when you get to calculus and
algebra,
everything else outside of it, you'll never ever use.
Yeah, okay. No, I do agree with that point of view. For me, it was the rote learning that was particularly painful, and part of the reason I didn't go towards the sciences, I never did, I went towards commerce, because I didn't like the mode of learning where you had to sit and memorize a whole lot of things, and I did not like that aspect of learning. I liked using reason, I liked using logic, I'd like understanding the core principles and then applying it, which is why I went towards commerce, because I felt that in subjects like economics and accounting, which is what we started studying that in high school, there was more opportunity to apply, whereas the science education in high school, you were still learning your periodic tables and all the fundamentals, which I guess you have to. But even then, in today's world where everybody will have the internet, artificial intelligence, some sort of assistance at their fingertips, you have to question the need to sort of memorize all these things in the way we currently do in a lot of the educational setting. So it's that memory, that rote learning aspect that never worked for me.
Okay.
So what you would change is so there's some core literacy, numeracy, and other skills you have to develop. But then very early on, you'd like the child to be freed from doing unnecessary things that doesn't really add to their life or align to their strengths.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, am I asking too much?
Oh, well, I would challenge that a little bit. What about things like history? Don't you think even if some kid finds history boring, they should know the basics? We were never taught history. I feel very ignorant. It was never a subject in the schools that I went to, and I personally have felt in my adult life that there's so much I don't know, and that I've had to educate myself later on.
Yeah, I think general knowledge is generally a good thing. I think I just resented having to learn all of Henry VIII's wives and when they lived and when they died and when they went to the toilet. The ins and outs of their lives.
To do an exam on it where you have to say exact year that Alexander Bell invented the telephone. Or it was nice to know that he did. I liked reading about them. It was fascinating to hear of all the discoveries, but it was the memorization of
and
the
then
exact
being judged on the result of not wanting to remember all of Henry VIII's wives and when they lived and died and how they died, rather than being encouraged to just learn about them without being tested and then feeling like an idiot when you can't remember the name of the last wife.
I mean, the fact that internet is going to give us all the information that we need, we have to really question whether we need exams and learning to be so focused on memory and recollection, because it's no longer a skill. It used to be a valuable skill pre-internet age, but now information can be accessed very easily. I mean, does it make sense to still score kids on recollection? Probably not. And so I think there is a cause for people who are focused and really thinking about education and really involved and have a say in how curriculum and exams are developed, to question the need for all of these things, because hopefully, kids are not going through the same thing. There is a certain element of memorization that's important, for example, when you're learning to read. So this comes back to how things are taught. So going back to Below the Wanderer, with the first book, numeracy was one of the core skills we wanted kids to develop in a very natural and fun way. The second element was literacy. It's with every book. When you read a book, you are learning how to read, right? Literacy is a core component. And so again, the books you read can have an influence on how easy and hard that is. The reason we wrote all the Below the Wanderer books in rhyme, even though I got so much advice and also pressure not to write in rhyme, the world of publishing has changed. And essentially, if you write a children's book in rhyme, a lot of editors in large publishing houses, they don't like receiving books in rhyme. One, because it limits the ability to translate the book. And two, they will say, oh, there's so much bad rhyme, we don't want bad rhyme. But you know, you work with editors, line editors, copy editors, you as a writer yourself, you put in the effort to make sure you're doing a good job with rhythm and rhyme, then you can produce good works. And we've endeavored to do that, to develop our work at a very high standard. So this sort of blanket kind of attitude towards books written in rhyme is not helpful, because one of the core skills in learning to read is phonics, developing the understanding of different letters and how different combination of letters make different sounds, right? It's something kids have to learn. So by reading or listening to a book written in rhyme, they start seeing the patterns very naturally. Rhyming just sort of naturally teaches them over time how to learn to read.
It's a bit like picking up English from songs. If it's not your first language and you hear songs, you can pick up English because it's easy to remember. That there's a tune and a rhythm and a melody, so it sticks in your head. And with the rhyme, there's a rhythm, isn't there?
The point was to say that it's not necessarily about what you learn, it's how you learn. I'm sure school curriculums are already focusing and has evolved beyond what we experience as kids at school. So I don't think there's as much rote learning, or we hope so.
Let us know. So what would you change about the way you were schooled? If you were to go back, what would you change?
The main thing would be reflecting the work we do at Wiser Stories, which is create stories with wisdom. The main thing that was lacking in our education system, I think, and I still cannot believe in this day and age, it's still not part of the education system or the standard curriculum, is mind training. I cannot understand, with the levels of mental health issues that young people are experiencing today, with the challenges they have today, I cannot understand why schools, education ministers, education departments have not put effort into introducing mind training classes into school, right? It is a complete rejection of everything science has told us about the mind in the last 50 years, and what contemplatives and philosophers have been telling us about the mind for the last, 2,000 to 5,000 years, right? We cannot in this day and age pretend that the world is just made of objective reality factors. We cannot in this day and age not acknowledge that we have an inner subjective world, and this inner subjective world is what determines our reality. It's how we experience the world. We experience it within ourselves. So there has to be a way to communicate that very explicitly to children from a very young age, so they understand that they are experiencing the world within them, and what they may experience at a point in time is not what their friend experiences at that point in time. Depending on who someone is, what their experience is, where they're coming from, they're experiencing the world in a slightly different way. But more importantly, that everybody has the ability to condition the state of their inner world. If there's one thing that I've learned in the world of contemplative and philosophy, it's that how we feel about the world is in our control. That was a line in one of our Below the Wanderer books. How we feel about life is in our control. And that's a knowledge that was never given to us going through school.
That's right.
Yeah, it always feels like things happen to us and we are reacting to it. But there's a space you can build around when things happen and how you react. And what you actually control is your reaction. And depending on how you react, you can either diffuse whatever is happening, or you can make it bigger and worse for yourself and for everyone else. Creating that space between events occurring and you reacting is all part of that broader knowledge.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much what I was going to say.
No, but
I would have probably brought in to the curriculum some formal teachings on the Stoicism, which then I would then lead into the Eastern philosophies, the more secular religions, Buddhism and the Upanishads.
Yoga, sort of the yogic side of
it's all pretty much
Hinduism.
The whole thread through those, and even through into modern psychiatry and psychotherapy,
Absolutely.
is what you were talking about, the fact that we do have that inner subjective state and it is separate from the outside world, and we can choose to not react to it, or we have a choice. Whereas again, all through our lives we're just taught to do anything but that, to be reactive.
It's never explicitly explained to us, right? So if you're listening to this for the first time and you are new to this world of what is mind training, what are mind sciences, it's that awareness that there's an inner subjective experience of life and that we are in control of that. Now, the way that has been taught for thousands of years in Eastern contemplative cultures and Western philosophical cultures is through a series of meditation practices. For example, when you start, you are cultivating attention. You are cultivating concentration. You are looking at an object and learning to focus on that object without being distracted by anything. And that's concentration and attention. Now, there's nothing spooky about that. Concentration and attention are two very critical skills that's actually been lost in today's world thanks to technology, thanks to social media, thanks to shorts and TikTok, right? People cannot hold their attention, so much so that they can't have the patience to read a book from end to end these days. And so just imagine countering that by bringing in a meditation practice for kids when they're starting out at kindergarten that says, pick your favorite rock or stone and look at it for a minute. And don't think about anything else, but just look at your rock and stone and observe it. And then when they're in year 1 or 2, maybe it becomes a bit more subtle. It says, sit for 2 minutes. You're in year 2, so sit for 2 minutes and feel the breath move in and out of your body. A more subtle kind of object that they are learning to focus and concentrate on. And in year 4, maybe it's a 4-minute walk at the beginning of the school day, where they're silently and quietly walking through a school compound and learning to observe everything that's happening around them and within them. And so developing, and this is how that training begins: concentration, attention, awareness, mindfulness.
About being present, feeling the ground as you walk and being attentive to that.
All these practices cultivates these skills, right? It cultivates this ability to focus. It cultivates this ability to observe. And all these things are such critical skills. That's how people who have made amazing scientific discoveries that we take for granted today, that's where it started. It was their ability to focus and observe and see and become aware of something that other people didn't. And we are losing these skills. School is a wonderful place to introduce some of these skills.
Yeah, I'm sure some of those leaps in the sciences, Newton when he first saw the apple drop, and how he then thought of gravity and what it means in a macro scale. I can imagine he'd have to be in a very meditative state to actually then extrapolate what he saw to what he then envisaged on a macro scale with gravity.
Yeah, and you need that time and space anyway at any point in your life, even if it's not as profound a discovery as Newton.
Yeah, but you can imagine in a moment though he would have had to be present, right?
Exactly.
Because you can imagine.
Exactly.
And then And the idea then just dropped into his head. And I'm also thinking of Einstein when he discovered his great equations, and they were creative moments, quiet moments where he had to actually think outside the box. They are contemplative moments. And I think we can teach that, to be present, and I think it's called to be in a fugue state, in the moment, and athletes talk about it, and even the racing Formula One drivers, you can't actually think about each corner. You have to be almost in a meditative state where your sixth sense is turning before the corner comes, and the good drivers are just in that meditative zone, but they don't even know it.
It's a moment of deep concentration, right? And where things just happen by itself. But yeah, I think whenever you find that quiet space, if you're working through problems, difficult problems, and you're not kind of getting it, or you're trying to get an inspiration, it's those quiet moments where it drops in. But you have to cultivate those quiet moments, and that's what some of these training and teaching can be about. I think this whole mind science is an area, is a curriculum, is a beautiful, rich curriculum that can be developed by bringing the best of the Western philosophical traditions, for example, what the Stoics taught, and the Eastern contemplative traditions, for example, the mind training exercises in Buddhism, or in yoga sciences or yogic traditions. You can bring those together to create a very comprehensive curriculum. But that brings me to my criticism of probably the modern mindfulness movement, which is part of modern day psychology. It is a derivation of Buddhism. They have taken the meditation practices, but they took away the scaffolding around the meditation practices, which was ethical and moral behavior. They've said you can concentrate, it's like a Formula One driver concentrating. It's a good form of concentration. It helps you achieve whatever outcome you're going for, which is winning. But it's devoid of any ethical and moral foundation. So it is not as profound as it could be.
Yeah, it doesn't develop their character, does it?
It doesn't.
No.
And if you look at what's happening in the world today, all these conflicts and leaders that are creating all these conflicts that we have elevated into positions of power and authority, all of them fundamentally lack a strong ethical foundation. The ones that are causing problems around the world right now.
I think there's one that is not.
One in particular, no names mentioned, but a lot of them do not have strong ethical, moral foundations. And we sort of accept that within politicians, but it's the same trait in a lot of business leaders, right? And it's that aspect which is missing in our education system, which is teaching basic secular ethics and morality and decency from a very young age, in a very engaging way, in a very nuanced way, not in a sort of dictatorial way, you must do this, you must do that, but in a way that encourages them to think, in a way that encourages them to explore the boundaries, the gray areas, and then sort of make decisions for themselves, that what would I do when faced in these circumstances, debate within themselves from a very young age what is the gray area and how to navigate gray areas. Because then by the time they are grown up and in these positions of leadership, etc., they've sort of thought through these things in a very deep way. So I think that's the other thing I would introduce.
Okay.
There is one more thing.
Okay, while the sun's gone down and we're getting rained on and eaten up by mosquitoes, was there anything else you could add to that rant?
One last thing I would do. I think school goes on for too long. And I think part of it is because we're being taught a lot of things that we're never going to use in life. And we're taught just because, right? They exist in curriculum. I think what will be better is really for educators, teachers, education ministers to sit down and say, what are the core skill sets we need students to develop by the time they're 16? Because I feel once people are 16, you have transformed into a young adult. All your hormones are raging. You're a young adult. I personally felt really caged in a school environment at the age of 16. Age of 16 is when I think we should let kids go and explore. By that stage, we should have taught them about ethics and morality. We should have taught them about mind training and subjective nature of reality, and given them some meditation practices and tools and techniques that they can use to navigate difficult situations within the framework of their own mind. By that time, they should have literacy and numeracy skills, and they have had developed a sense of themselves and what their strengths are and where they should probably place their focus on. And we've given them good education and training about their own body and their own sexual health, so they can take control of those things in a way that we weren't taught. Armed with all that knowledge, at that age of 16, they should be set free. School should have ended and they're no longer in a rigid environment. In between that period of finishing school and then adulting, so taking on future education or an apprenticeship or going to university, college, vocational training, whatever, there should be at least 1 year where kids are encouraged to travel and volunteer. There should be programs put in place by governments all over the world that gives children and kids at that age free board, free food, in exchange for their time volunteering. They should volunteer in aged care facilities. They should volunteer to look after the environment. They should volunteer whatever,
charity work,
whatever it is, but a year of travel and selfless service. Because if kids do these two things, the world isn't just going to be about me, my strengths, my job, my career, my education, my money. It'll be about stepping outside of self and being selfless and just giving. A lot of people experience this aspect of selfless service and just how amazing it is for your soul, for your own well-being. A lot of us only experience this when we are much older and we are training other kids, other young people at work, or when we are volunteering ourselves. If you ask people, this is one of the most, rewarding thing you can do.
Life affirming. I think one of the best Christmases I've had, I volunteered at a men's halfway house in Woolloomooloo, and I was just cooking for them and feeding them at Christmas Day, and there was a father there and he had 3 of his young children. They must have been between 6 and 10, and I asked him, it's Christmas, shouldn't you be on holiday or something? And he said that life's been good to him. He's come into money because he's been very lucky. He's worked hard, but he hasn't come from money. He worked really hard, and he wanted to show his kids the other side of life, so they appreciate what they have. And so these kids were helping out on Christmas, and that was their Christmas, and it was so life affirming, and yeah, it was just wonderful to see.
And I'm sure with hindsight, the kids will absolutely love that,
And it comes back to what we're talking about, the curricula. If they incorporate something like that in the system,
I know,
especially the privileged children, I mean, it'd just be a better world.
It will be. Before you sort of go on a path of just focusing on yourself, one-pointed focus on yourself, your skills, your career, your job, your income, have that year where you just give. The sort of humans that we'll raise in the world will be very different. Because I think part of the suffering in these early adulthood years is because we are so inwardly focused on us, on ourselves, and our success as individuals. And that is something that's conditioned in us through school, because there's very little teamwork. It's about individuals. It's about individual grades. Sport and other things does help to create a sort of broader team kind of values. But even then, that's within a very contained tribe. So it can get quite tribal as well. So I think it's just opening up, and that's why travel is an important part of it. It's important that at that age, 16, 17, 18, you are leaving your tribe that you grew up with and going and moving somewhere completely different, experiencing a different part of the world, different set of people, different cultures, and seeing just how similar all humans are. And then just without asking for anything in return, being grateful, not having to worry about your food and board, and just being able to give.
Oh, it's a very first world privileged position to be in, though.
I mean, it's not traveling to the other part of the world. It can be traveling to a different community. The point is you get away. If you're in eastern suburbs and you've always grown up in eastern suburbs, go to Northern Territory or go to Western Sydney or go to somewhere else and do your volunteering in a different part, so that you kind of get out of this mindset that, oh, I'm in this clique and this is it, and people over here are like me and everyone else isn't. And that's an attitude that needs to change. So yes, that's I think it's about to rain. So do we want to quickly wrap it up?
Yeah.
School is great, and I think one thing I want to say is this talk wasn't about saying anything about teachers. I think they do a phenomenal job all around with what they have to work with, and it's not easy being a teacher. So this is not a criticism about any teachers, any education system that we've been through. It's a tough gig, right? And this is not something necessarily teachers can do. This is something that school principals and public policy kind of people really need to get their head around, is the curriculum. What's taught to students? Does it arm them for the future? Does it give them the ability to navigate life? And does it make them better humans? That's what we, I think, really need to focus on as we get ready for a different kind of world over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, let's get ready.
Let's get ready. Thank you for listening.